In stories, things only work when characters act in accordance with their nature, and the world remains coherent. Every scene has to grow out of who the characters are and how the world actually works. The moment events start happening because the plot needs them, rather than the characters or world naturally pushing them, the narrative begins to fall apart. This is the case with Gachiakuta. The reception has been split. Some see Gachiakuta as a breath of fresh air in battle shonen, with a unique setting and a creative power system. Others dismiss it as generic, trope-heavy, and uninspired. But neither side is actually looking at the same story. Gachiakuta's core ideas are strong, but the execution is so fundamentally broken that it undermines nearly everything the story attempts. And in this video, we're going to break down exactly why its writing fails. Gachiakuta's core issue is character positioning. Character positioning is a concept I made to describe how a story aligns a character's inner world with their outer situation. It's about how their thoughts, emotions, and beliefs interact with their relationships, environment, and choices, so that when they take action, it makes sense. Gachiakuta often overlooks how it writes its characters, failing to establish a suitable catalyst for change. One of the clearest examples comes in the very first episode. We're introduced to Rudo as someone breaking the law. Even if the town's reaction to Rudo's stealing is excessive, the episode makes it clear that he understands the risks, and others, like Chiwa, have warned him about the consequences. For what it's worth, he seemingly went through the trouble of getting a doll for Chiwa. The story positions her as the only person besides Rudo's father who sees value in him. She knows he crosses the line to get trash. She defends him against bullies. She ignores her mother's warnings. She actively resists social pressure. And most of all, Chiwa cares deeply for him, both romantically and emotionally. She defines the idea of seeing value in something perceived as trash more than Rudo does. Looking back, Chiwa was built for a very specific dramatic role. As Rudo's sole source of kindness and understanding, her eventual turn is supposed to emotionally shatter him and shock the audience. That's the intended effect. For that to work, the story has to build a bridge. The audience needs to understand why change happens and how it makes sense from the character's perspective. There must be a solid reason, either emotional or logical, that prompts the character to shift. And in Chiwa's case, this simply doesn't work. The supposed catalyst for her shift is seeing Rudo helpless and covered in blood, a sight that makes him look like a killer. But from her point of view, Rudo would have had to murder his adopted father immediately after their romantic moment. She sees a boy who left her feeling loved and supported, and the story expects her to suddenly believe he killed the person he cared for most. If he had killed a bully or someone he openly clashed with, the turn might be easier to accept. But the story asks her to assume he murdered someone he had no visible conflict with, from her perspective. It's a massive leap in her thinking, and just as large of a leap for the audience. Fans might say Chiwa changed under social pressure, but that doesn't make sense given that she's been friends with Rudo despite it. When she visits the crime scene, she briefly questions things, then jumps to not believing Rudo when he explains that something's wrong.
Chiwa! They think I murdered Red Toad! Please help me, the real killer is still out there!
That isn't a dramatic portrayal. That's a break in character. At the very least, it would have been more effective to keep Chiwa away from the crime scene. Leave her confused and unsure, only to see Rudo later without hearing his explanation. Giving her a moment of doubt and then letting her listen to Rudo's side only makes her eventual reversal even more confusing. This is a case where the emotional turn was poorly executed. Chiwa's trust in Rudo was written too strongly, and the surrounding events don't provide a convincing push. This weakens Rudo's rage, which matters since it's meant to be the emotional backbone of the entire story. Unfortunately, even that part is poorly written. Rudo wasn't framed for the murder, even though fans often act as if he were. He was simply at the wrong place at the wrong time, and the Apostle's arrival may have been a consequence of his earlier actions in the episode. The actual killer didn't attempt to frame Rudo, and there's no confirmation that the killer called the Apostles. In the manga, Rudo doesn't even see who killed his father. He only assumes it was the masked man, which is unintentionally ironic, since now he's just accusing someone of murder without evidence. These details matter because the story aims to portray Rudo as wronged by the world. But that doesn't work when Rudo had already been stealing from the other side, which, in his world, is enough to get him thrown into the pit anyway. Rudo acts as if everyone around him is blindly obedient, as if they're sheep. This overlooks what the story's already established. People know Rudo steals from the other side, and they don't report him. In fact, some of them buy from him. They clearly aren't all mindless followers. All of this makes Rudo's outbursts feel disconnected from what is actually going on. His rage doesn't read as righteous or as the cry of someone who has been wronged. One might argue that this is intentional, that the narrative portrays Rudo's anger as misplaced to set up the lessons he learns from the cleaners. That interpretation could explain his later growth, although it still doesn't fully add up, since Rudo was punished for something he didn't do. But for the sake of argument, let's assume this is the intended point. Even that direction has problems.
Once Rudo meets the cleaners, Gachiakuta sets up a positive change arc, in which he finds a new family and begins the path toward becoming a better person.
This is meant to contrast his revenge arc, which threatens to pull him in the opposite direction. Stories like this have worked before. You can see a similar duality in Part 1 Sasuke from Naruto, and Kurapika from Hunter x Hunter.
But in Gachiakuta, the balance is off, leaning too far in one direction.
You can see this imbalance during Rudo's first encounter with Zanka. When the cat steals money, Rudo grabs Zanka's staff without permission to capture it. When Zanka confronts him, Rudo becomes defensive and calls the staff dumb. This appears to be exclusive to the dub and sub, and not in the manga. There, Rudo mostly has a neutral expression towards the staff. However, both versions still undermine Rudo's characterization, given that throughout his life, he's cherished things that people see as trash. Rudo believes that objects have a soul, and was told by Injin that the theory was pretty much true. For him to understand how something as simple as gloves means so much, yet still act surprised when another person cares deeply about an object, and then take it, just doesn't add up. He should have instantly known what he did was wrong, and simply apologized, rather than the strange lesson he learned from his adopted father. This lesson isn't unusual on its own. It's useful for growth and communication, but it completely undermines Rudo as someone driven by revenge. Characters like Sasuke or Kurapika can't receive kindergarten moral lessons on kindness and empathy, as such lessons would erase the core of their arcs. They live in worlds where violence defines their reality. Rudo doesn't. If someone like Sasuke was taught that violence is bad, rather than being further indoctrinated into the ninja way, even by the heroes, his drive to kill Itachi would fall apart. Sasuke can form bonds, grow emotionally, and genuinely care about his team, all while staying on a believable path toward revenge. There's a rope that pushes and pulls, creating tension and suspense,
Whereas in Gachiakuta, it cuts that rope completely. Rudo internalizes these lessons and puts them into practice, which makes revenge impossible. It becomes something he would never seriously pursue, or even find useful. Gachiakuta consistently positions its characters in the wrong emotional state, and as a result, they take actions that feel forced, as if the writer were manually pushing them forward.
This same problem reappears with Zanka's backstory. He's not just a gifted student, he comes from a prestigious family, and stands out as the most talented in his class. But everything changes when a new student arrives and surpasses everyone. This sends Zanka into a downward spiral of self-loathing, so extreme that he isolates himself into a pit to starve. Injin gives him a pep talk on how an average Joe can surpass a genius. The issue is that none of this makes sense. Zanka's not an average Joe. He's the second strongest student at the academy. The jump from being second place to suddenly believing he's just average isn't framed or grounded in a way that tracks. The conflict itself also has holes. The story never actually proves that the new student is as talented as it claims. Other characters offer reasonable explanations for losing to her, even though it's more of a coping mechanism within the story. If everyone had time to adapt, then we could judge her talent more accurately. And at this point in the story, what natural talent even means is unclear. Someone like Rudo can easily be seen as a genius, being able to wield multiple vital instruments with little to no formal training. On the other hand, the new girl is portrayed as skilled, yet we're never shown how she became that way, leaving it unclear whether she's innately talented or simply using an effective style. The story treats talent and hard work as mutually exclusive. It assumes the talented side doesn't train, and Zanka immediately assumes the new student's skill comes from pure natural ability, which somehow makes her the real deal. This ignores the fact that Zanka himself is both naturally gifted and hardworking, all while the school stresses training. If natural talent were the sole determinant, then there would be no need for competition for the chair, since it isn't even decided after Rio beats all of the students. Instead of exploring these ideas, the story presents them as if they cancel each other out, and it doesn't ground them in the characters' experiences. The result is an incoherent backstory which ruins Zanka's motivation. Zanka's conversation with Hio adds to this very idea. She dismisses his desire for recognition as pointless, and the story frames her as correct. Zanka doesn't defend himself, reflect, or gain new insight. Instead, he's shown silently confused, as if he doesn't understand his own ambition. The scene treats his core motivation, wanting to be valued, like something shallow, with Hio's worldview overriding his completely. Then there's Injin's encouragement. He explains that holding onto the stick shows Zanka's determination.
But I know you don't want to give up. It's in your voice. Probably still holding that stupid stick.
Zanka will prove that the average Joe can go beyond genius. However, this doesn't align with Zanka's own behavior. Zanka hated himself, and the stick is part of his self-loathing. His attachment isn't a sign of drive, it's a sign of despair. Nothing in Injin's speech addresses Zanka's concerns, as it misdiagnoses the real problem. The story suggests that Zanka needs to learn not to give up, but his fundamental flaw is his need for external validation, and he doesn't even know why he craves it. That is what needs to be addressed, and should be the core conflict. And Zanka's backstory isn't the only place where the story forces ideas that the context can't support. The same problem shows up again when the focus shifts to the cleaners. As soon as Rudo joins them, the narrative introduces a moral conflict. Injin is firmly against needless violence and killing, yet he implicitly supports Rudo in pursuing a goal built on violence. What we see from Injin early on doesn't match who he's later revealed to be. He willingly lets Rudo fight random, unpowered people, just to test his abilities, even though Rudo could have killed them simply because he's unfamiliar with his powers and was fighting with murderous intent. Rudo conveniently knows when to stop with some of the guys, but goes too far with only one guy. This should show Injin that helping Rudo return to the sphere is dangerous, and he should be the first one telling him that revenge isn't the answer. But Injin already knows all of that, since Rudo told him his goal was to go back and beat everyone to death. This leaves both Injin and Rudo in a strange position. Rudo's development should have already pushed him away from revenge once he's with the cleaners, yet the story keeps pretending he still wants it. And the cleaners, especially Injin, act as if helping him pursue that goal makes sense, when it directly contradicts what they stand for. This could work if Injin were manipulating Rudo to be a better person, or if some motivation made him care about Rudo. Still, it's mostly centered on Rudo's unique talent rather than his characterization. This brings us to the Raiders, who finally push the story in the right direction. The conflict they introduce is compelling, and Zodell initially appears to be a great villain because he exposes the contradiction in Rudo's supposed goal of revenge. Ironically, this works not because the writing is strong, but because Rudo's arc is so confused that any focused pressure highlights the cracks. Unfortunately, the moment doesn't stick the landing. Rudo's found family speech, where he claims he gained something Zodell never had, falls apart just based on what the story shows. The line is unintentionally funny though, since it casually throws Chiwa under the bus, as if she never cared about Rudo as a person.
Out of everyone on the sphere, the ground, they were the only people besides Regto to see me for the guy I really am.
But more importantly, Rudo has no reason to make these claims about Zodell, since he knows nothing about Zodell's personal relationships. If anything, the story shows the opposite. Zodell has a somewhat close team and relies on them. He cares deeply about eliminating waste, which implies he doesn't see his own people as waste, or at least only pawns, despite them being flawed, quirky, or asking foolish questions, like Fu and Bundus. So, Rudo's moral conclusion is not only poorly constructed, it directly contradicts what the story presents. Given Zodell's obsession with predictions, experiments, and efficiency, he should already know how incompetent or unreliable his own team members are. Yet he gets angry, as if Rudo struck a nerve. Going back to Rudo, he chooses to stay with his found family and pursue revenge happily. What does it even mean to happily seek revenge? When the culprit is known and the crime is not ambiguous, his motivation becomes muddled. It could have made sense if the story shifted his goal toward helping the people of the sphere, acknowledging that others like Chiwa are a product of their circumstances, and that Rudo is partly to blame as well, which makes his experiences of learning empathy and responsibility all the more important. But even then, the people still view him as a killer, and his father's death remains unsolved. The story tries to keep revenge in play while also softening it into a feel-good desire, as if being happy itself counts as revenge.
Gachiakuta is a deeply flawed story, where the writer's hand keeps showing. The audience can see the trick, so the act loses its mythic feel. Even with all its issues, the series can deliver great moments, like Almost's episodes. In those scenes, the narrative handles sensitive ideas well, and it delivers emotional beats that make sense for the characters. But the illusion breaks the moment you think about how the characters even end up in these situations. In episode 10, they come across an unstable girl in the middle of nowhere, and think she's the person they're searching for. It could make sense why they choose to follow her, since she doesn't look like a threat, but this is strange just given where she lives, so she must be up to something. Instead, they go to her home, clearly notice how strange everything is, and still choose to remove their masks and venture deeper inside. These mistakes might be forgivable on their own, but a nearly identical situation already happened in episode 5, where the group was physically pushed as a unit into an enemy trap. At that point, it becomes a pattern, and evidence that the author struggles to introduce conflict naturally. In a world that's supposed to be information scarce and dangerous, the cleaners shouldn't be this naive. And they aren't, technically. The story shows them noticing the red flags, and then choosing to ignore them anyway. There's even odd inconsistencies in characterization, or lack thereof, like Bundish shifting from a guy with his own motives into a sudden villain, then back again. These setups might lead to powerful moments, but the moment you ask, how did this even happen? The whole thing collapses. Gachiakuta isn't generic, and it doesn't suffer from a slow start or an overload of shonen tropes. Its fundamental flaws is deeper and less vague. It's a story where characters lose their positioning, where their actions stop coming from who they are and start coming from what the writer needs them to do. And once that happens, the narrative can never hold itself together.